In this presentation, you will see Christianity defended by apologist Dr. Robert A. Morey. Dr. Morey holds 2 doctorates, one in apologetics and one in Islamic studies. He will be challenged by apologist Dr. Jamal Badawi, who will defend the Islamic position. Dr. Badawi is professor at St. Mary's University. And now, the great debate, Islam versus the Christian faith.
It's my pleasure to be moderating this session, and I just want to make it clear, as a professor on this campus, we are given authority over the classrooms that we're within, and we are asked to make sure that order is maintained, and order will be maintained. If there are comments from the audience before the question and answer time, I will stop the session, and I will ask you to leave. And if you don't leave, we'll make some other arrangements. But we will maintain order. The topics today for the first session, the session that I am moderating, is Allah, according to the Koran, the true universal God? And for our 2 speakers today, I will say that, for example, Dr. Morey, you are not to attack in any way Dr. Badawi, but you are to address the issue, is Allah, according to Quran, the true God, the true universal God. In the same way, Dr. Badawi, there is not to be an attack on any speaker, and the book that we are to refer to is the topic at hand, the Quran. Is Allah, according to the Quran, the true universal God? And we will maintain according to that topic as previously agreed upon by both of you. Our first speaker will be, indeed, Dr. Badawi, and it is my honor to introduce him. I will introduce both speakers now, and then we will go into the session. The first speaker, indeed, is Dr. Jamal Badawi. He's a professor at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Canada. He's chairman also of the management department there. He's a member of the Juristic Council of North America. Dr. Badawi is the founder and chairman of the Islamic Information Foundation, which has produced over 350 half-hour TV programs on Islam, broadcasted on several cable stations in the U.S. and Canada, in addition to showing in other countries. Dr. Badawi is the author of numerous booklets and articles on Islam. He's married and has 5 children and 7 grandchildren. Dr. Morey is author of over 30 books, some of which have been translated into Spanish, French, German, Italian, Finnish, Turkish, Chinese, and other languages. He is the executive director of the Research and Education Foundation, which is dedicated to research and education concerning those topics which affect the future of Western thought and culture. Dr. Morey has earned degrees in philosophy, theology, and apologetics, and has been on hundreds of TV and radio programs. Dr. Morey is married with 2 children. Each speaker will be given 50 minutes on the topic, is Allah, according to the Quran, the true universal God? After the 50 minutes, then the other speaker will be given 10 minutes for a rebuttal, and then it will be the next speaker's turn with the same time allotment. Dr. Badawi.
And we begin with the term Allah. On that slide, you find subdivision of what I intend to cover under this broader title. First, some of the Western references, especially those that Dr. Morey quotes in his Islamic invasion, which I'd like to call invasion of Islam, in fact. Western references. Secondly, I'm going to ask the question whether that term, Allah, is derived from the moon god. Thirdly, what term is used by Christian Arabs? Fourthly, to discuss whether fear and intimidation is the reason why Christian Arabs use the term Allah. Beginning with the first sub-area, we find that contrary to Dr. Morey's conclusions, I have 8 encyclopedias that I quoted that he also referred, most of them, almost all of them he referred to. In Americana, it says Allah, this is the definition of the term as it appears under that title, means God, capital G, or more properly, the God, the sole unique divinity. Britannica indicate that Muslims of all nationalities accept the term Allah as the one true God. In Britannica, the 73 edition, it simply, this is the Arabic term for God, capital G. In Britannica, 87, the unique or wahid, inherently one, or ahad. In the following one, we have 4 additional references that Dr. Morey also refers to. God is the unique one, the creator, or Allah. Shorter Encyclopedia of Islam, the proper name of God, that's an additional point. The proper name of God among Muslims. Encyclopedia of Religion, it says Allah is presented in Islam as the proper name of God. Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, edited by James Hastings, the proper name of God among Muslims. Therefore, I conclude that contrary to Dr. Morey's conclusions and references that he used, actually, they speak about Allah, meaning the one true God, which is also the proper name for God. The second title, the question: is the word Allah derived from the moon god? Or does it have anything to do with biblical language and biblical terms? Here in the 1910 edition of Britannica, it clearly says that it is compounded of al, the definitive article, and ilah, which means God. And notice here, the same word, this is the bold-faced one, the same word is found in Hebrew and Aramaic as well as Arabic. Britannica, 73. Contrary to the frequent claims made by Dr. Morey that Allah is not a biblical name. In fact, it says that the proper etymology is the contraction of al-ilah, the God, although Aramaic alaha has been proposed. There is a brother here before the meeting who showed me a copy of the Aramaic Bible, and it has exactly the term alaha. Encyclopedias are correct, at least in that respect. Britannica, 87. The origin of the name can be traced to early Semitic writings in which the word for God was El-I-L or El-E-L, the latter being the Old Testament synonym for Yahweh. Is it a biblical name then or not, or the origin of it? Next, Encyclopedia of Islam. Again, it says another suggestion of the origin of Allah is the Aramaic Allaha. For Islam, the name Allah is indeed, as MacDonald said, El, the proper name of God that's among the Hebrew people. Short Encyclopedia of Islam. It says Allah is of Aramaic Allaha, the God, again corresponding to Yahweh. Encyclopedia of Religion, 87. The origin of Al-Ilah is found in the root common to various ancient Semitic language, that Aramaic, Hebrew, and Arabic. Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics. Allah corresponding to the usage of Jehovah or Yahweh among the Hebrews. Next item. What kind of term has been used by the Christian Arabs for God? Britannica. Allah is the standard Arabic word for God used by the Arab Christians. Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics. In the current Arabic Bible, that's 62. In the current Arabic Bible versions, God is uniformly referred to as Allah. Kenneth Cragg, which has been quoted also by Dr. Morey, he said, since both Christians and Muslim faith believe in one supreme, sovereign, creator God. They are obviously referring, when they speak of him, under whatever name, to the same being. Now, Dr. Morey contends that the reason why the Arabic Bible used that term is the persecution of Islam, because Islam was dominant and there was no Bibles in Arabic prior to the 9th century. I got some physical evidence with me right here. Here is a copy of the Arabic New Testament published by the American press in Beirut, 1955. And remember, Beirut is in Lebanon, and Lebanon is half Muslim, approximately half Christian, and until very recently, the president has always been a Christian. Beirut, 1977, the term Allah in Arabic is used. Beirut, 1986, the term Allah is used. In Jerusalem, in 1977, a New Testament in Arabic is also printed using the term Allah. Remember that Jerusalem has been under Israeli occupation since 1967. Finland, that's not a Muslim country, intimidated by Muslims, is it? Finland, printing an interpretive translation of the Injil, the Gospel, printed in 1974, using the term Allah. Colorado, United States, printed, but no date, using the term Allah. Minneapolis, Minnesota, 1991, using the term Allah. I don't know whether there could be any doubt about what is understood in Arabic by the term Allah. It is indeed very strange to say that Muslims forced Christians and Christian translators and clergy to use the term Allah and did not force them to change religion. It's very strange indeed, let us alone the kind of respect that was shown to people to follow their own faith according to the dictates of the Quran. The next item. So Dr. Morey keeps saying that the term Allah was known before the Prophet came, and it is associated with paganism or with the moon god, as we'll show later. So as such, has nothing to do really with true monotheism. I think that reflects some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding about the nature of Arab beliefs and the existence of monotheism already in Arabia. According to Muslims, Prophet Abraham left his son Ishmael and his wife Hagar in Mecca. So there was monotheism already. There were procedures for pilgrimage even to commemorate certain events that took place in the life of Abraham and Ishmael. So monotheism was known. It is a big mistake to think that the pre-Islamic Arabs were idol worshippers, in a sense that they believed that those idols indeed were the creators of heaven and earth. Here is a list of evidence from the Quran. If we move to the evidence from the Quran, which is so obvious and clear that the Arabs did believe in the one true universal God of all. Just to give you an example of this, if you ask them, who has created the heavens and earth and subjected the sun and the moon, they will certainly reply, Allah. How are they then deluded away from the truth? If you ask them who sent the rain down, they will say Allah. Who created the heavens and earth? They will admit it is Allah. And the same you find throughout the Quran. Their problem really was not that they did not believe in the existence of the supreme God that they might have inherited through the Abrahamic family tree, through Ishmael. Their problem was to associate others with God and to believe that those idols can act as intermediaries between God and man. And that is shown actually in the following slide. Why did they worship idols then? The Quran answered that question clearly. لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى, so that they may bring us nearer to Allah. That's the mistake they did. They did not think that those idols indeed are gods as such. There are examples also from other sources that Dr. Morey keeps quoting. In the shorter Encyclopedia of Islam, it says there, the Meccans admit that Allah is creator and supreme provider. Now I move to another question, another sub-area. Did Islam indeed accept or just adapt this distorted view? Was Islam nothing more than an extension of these paganistic images about God? According to the Quran, absolutely no. But even to get to Western scholars, normally quoted by, some of them at least quoted by Dr. Morey in his writings, you go to Americana. It says, when the Prophet Muhammad began to preach the pagan Arabs in the 7th century, the heart of his message lay in the declaration that Allah is the sole unique divinity. Notice here, sole unique divinity, not just another God or a higher God. Sole, la ilaha illallah. But the question here that you should raise, if Islam was nothing but an extension of the paganistic view of God, why did the pre-Islamic Arabs fiercely persecute the Prophet and kill his followers for a period of 13 years? They suffered all kinds of difficulties under them, if it's just an extension to their belief. Unless it was totally radical from their polytheistic ideas, they would have not fought against the Prophet. There are other reasons, of course, for their opposition. At least in the matter of belief, there could be no reason for them to oppose. According to Britannica, it's clearly stated that Allah is the one and only God, or the notion of Allah as the one and only is the pivot of Muslim faith. In the following quotation from Britannica 87, Allah is creator, judge, and rewarder, omnipotent, and all-merciful. The question that I should raise here, which of these attributes, I ask my Jewish and Christian brethren here, which of these attributes would you say is non-biblical? And does it apply to the God you and I believe in? Encyclopedia of Islam. It says, but the vague notion of supreme but not sole divinity, which Allah seems to have connoted in the Meccan religion, notice here the bolded letters, was to become both universal and transcendental. It was to be turned by the Quranic teaching into affirmation of the living God, the exalted one. What kind of God do Jews and Christians believe in if he's not the living and exalted one? The next item, Encyclopedia of Islam. It says, hence, from the beginning, not something that he just tried to compromise, from the beginning of Muhammad's preaching, the affirmation of God, Allah, as benefactor, creator, bountiful, imparting instructions to men, to men through a messenger to whom he was in a special way the Lord. Question: what did Israelite prophets teach differently from this? 6. Shorter Encyclopedia of Islam. It says, but though the name Allah was the same for the Meccans and for Muhammad, notice this, their conceptions of the nature of the bearer of the name must have differed widely. Differed widely. That only makes sense. Otherwise, why did they oppose the Prophet and complain that he made all the gods one God and all this kind of objection to his teaching? Encyclopedia of Religion. It says certain types in the Hijaz, which is now in Saudi Arabia, also invoked him, means God, as is shown in the end of Surah 29. However, the same surah illustrates that Allah, the God of the Quranic teaching, has nothing in common. This is crucial. Nothing in common with any similarly named divinity. Anyone can take any good name of God, Allah or Jehovah or whatever, and you get a statue and say this is Yahweh. It doesn't mean that Yahweh is false or their attribution is false. Gibb, quoted also by Dr. Morey, in that particular book, quoted, I mean, in other books of his, both the concept of a supreme God and the Arabian term Allah have been shown to be familiar to the Arabs in Muhammad's time. What Muhammad ﷺ did was to give a new and fuller content of the concept, to purify it from elements of polytheism which still clustered around it. The last quotation is indeed very interesting because it is also from an author, and I believe the same book also that Dr. Morey refers to in his writing, to prove that Allah is nothing but a pagan god or a moon god. Here, verbatim what Alfred Gulam says, and I let you judge. Like the Old Testament prophets, Muhammad took steps to put an end to practices which were inconsistent with monotheism. The Quran condemns the heathen rites as sacred stones, which it calls uncleanliness and the work of Satan. It orders believers to have nothing to do with them and forbids Muslims to eat the meat of an animal which has been slain in such places. Now let us move to the next sub-area, the crescent. There was, I think, one before that. It's the crescent, an Islamic symbol. In his writing, Dr. Morey keeps saying that one of the evidences in his mind that Allah is nothing but the moon god, that he says that this appears on the flags of Muslim countries. First of all, that is not correct. Out of the 38 countries with majority Muslims, there is hardly 4 or 5 countries that has the crescent. The great majority do not. Number 2, even the birthplace of Islam, Saudi Arabia, their flag does not have a crescent. That would have been the most logical flag to have the crescent if there's any connection whatsoever with moon worship. Number 3, the fact that in Muslim countries today you find a lot of domes or minarets are topped with a crescent. It's a cultural practice. It was not done by the Prophet in his time or upon his instruction. And my guess, I could be wrong, that this is just a tradition so that the travelers would find which is a church and which is a mosque, because both have also minarets. So maybe they just put that as a distinction to attract people or to show that this is the place for the mosque, to distinguish as a place of worship. It's a later tradition. It's not a teaching in the Quran. It's not a teaching of the Prophet. Number 5, there is no Muslim that I know of who attach any significance whatsoever or belief to the question of the crescent god simply because the crescent has been used to distinguish buildings. 6, maybe one of the reasons that Muslims follow the lunar calendar, but Dr. Morey wants us to believe that this is a further evidence of worshipping the moon. But don't the Jews also use the lunar calendar? Do the Jews worship the crescent? Number 7, Christians also had some symbols, like the cross, like the fish. Does that mean that they worship the fish god? But now, let's leave all that aside and conclude that there is nothing called religious symbol in Islam. There is nothing called, it's a fiction to speak about a religious symbol in Islam. There is no symbolism in Islam. Even the flag at the time of the Prophet was just a small piece of cloth. That's all. There's no symbol as we find the cross with its significance to the Christian, of course, becoming a symbol, or the Star of David for the Jews. We cannot equate the crescent with that. It's just tradition that grew up, has nothing to do, no connection with worship at all. But then what is more important, what does the Quran say about the moon? And I was really surprised reading Dr. Morey's book, that he refers to the verse but doesn't really quote it in full, or quote it at all even. And he says the Quran make mention of the sun and the moon. Whereas if you really look at the verse that he's referring to, it says of his signs, of the signs of God's creation. ومن آياته الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر لا تسجدوا للشمس ولا للقمر واسجدوا لله الذي خلقهن إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. So crystal clear of the signs of God's creations, or signs of God is the creation of heavens and earth, and the sun and the moon. Prostrate not to the sun or the moon, but prostrate to the one who created them, if indeed him that you worship. The Quran clearly makes in number 2 clear that the sun and moon are not to be worshipped. They are subservient to us. سَخَّرَ لَكُمْ. Allah made it subservient for the use of mankind. I didn't hear of anyone who used his God as his subservient. Number 3, 26 verses in the Quran speak about the moon. Not one treats it other than a creation of Allah subjected to His will. Number 4, the sun and moon are created by Allah also, is mentioned in Bukhari. And here I'd like to humbly suggest to Dr. Morey to correct himself and be big enough to make that correction, because this is a factual misquotation. Dr. Morey in his book quotes or refers to 11 hadith in Bukhari to support his statement that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reached up with his sword and cut the moon into half. Reached up with his sword, and then he mocks at Islam by saying that sword must be either very big or the moon is the size of the basketball. You have the volumes of Bukhari, Dr. Morey. I challenge you to show me in a single hadith of the 11 hadith that you quoted, where does it mention the word sword? It is nowhere to be found in the 11 hadith that you quoted. That requires correction. Nor does any of this hadith say that the Prophet split the moon. It says the moon was split ala ahdi Rasulillah, at the time of the Prophet, and the Prophet said, witness, as a sign. This is a factual correction that is needed. Some people might say, how about the concept of daughters of Allah? Oftentimes when I read Dr. Morey's works or hear his tapes, he seems to be giving a false impression that the daughters of Allah that the Arabs believed in are even mentioned in the Quran, leaving the reader with the misleading impression that the Quran mentioned the daughters of Allah by way of agreeing with them. This is not so, Dr. Morey. When you look carefully into the Quran, where the word Banatullah, or daughters of Allah, يَجْعَلُونَ لِلَّهِ مَا يَصِفُونَ, they attribute to Allah females as his daughters, and to themselves the sons. Not one of them, not one, agrees with this distorted notion. It ridicules the idea of God having daughters or sons, for that matter. So the fact that the Quran mentioned some of the idols believed by some Arabs to be daughters of Allah, Allat and Uzza and Manat, is not an admission, it's condemnation, that this is wrong. In fact, there is a reference in the Quran in 7:180, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُلْحِدُونَ فِي أَسْمَائِنَا لَا يَخْفَوْنَ عَلَيْنَا, that those who distort and profane our names, we know about them, Allah says in the Quran. And in fact, as some scholars suggested, that in a way of mockery, in mocking true monotheistic faith, some of those ignorant pre-Islamic Arabs, in their fanaticism, they tried to twist the word Allah into Allat Al-Aziz, which means who is powerful, who has authority, into Al-Uzza, and Al-Mannan, the one who provides for mankind, into Manat. But nowhere, Dr. Morey, as you contend, there is any admission or acceptance or mention by way of acquiescence to this paganism. We move to the next one, the so-called moon god. And my question here, moon god or the Bible or the God of the Bible? Dr. Morey keeps insisting consistently on something that I humbly believe to be extremely wrong and erroneous. That Muslims and Christians, or Muslims on one hand, Christians and Jews on the other, have absolutely nothing in common, that Allah is a pagan God, is a moon God, and all of this, it is not the God of the Bible. I refer you to Dr. Morey, to Alfred Gulam that you quote profusely in some places. Page 7. The oldest name for God used by the Semitic world, that means Allah, pronounced El in ancient Babylonia, El in ancient Israel. Some scholars trace the name to the southern Arabian Ilah. But notice here what Dr. Gulam say. Ilah, a title, not name. Ilah, a title of the moon god in Arabia. Allah was known from Christian and Jewish sources as the one God. Later he says it is clear from Nabatean and other inscriptions that Allah meant the God. Here is an important notice here. The word ilah actually in Arabic means God, deity. But that's a title. It simply means God or Lord. It could be any. You can have many ilahs. The Quran sometimes uses this, that some people have gods, means false gods. So deities. It is different from Allah. So let's not make that mix. Let's not make that mix and be honest about it. Ilah is a title. The pagan can use, anyone can use. But when you use Allah, as we have seen with profuse evidence, does not equate with any God, just a high God or higher God or one of the gods, but as the one and only. Gulam also does not speak of the name of the moon god, but title of the moon god. This is significant to keep in mind. Montgomery Watt says, admittedly, this is a person who is really a scholar. I do not agree with many of his views. He's critical of Islam. But at least he's a scholar enough and honest enough and analytical enough to say the following. Admittedly, the average Muslim's cluster of ideas is different from the average Christians. Yes. But the correct way to express this is not by saying that the being denoted is different. Muslims must in intention be worshipping and speaking about the same being as Christians, even if their assertions about that being or about this being differ. Notice what he says after that. After all, there are Christian Arabs, Orthodox, Catholic and Protestant, and their only word for God is Allah. Their only word. There's nothing in the language but this, to refer to the supreme God of all, which, like the Greek ho theos, I think it should have been a space here, means simply the God. Now I come to the final part, and I think we're doing all right with time, I hope. My stopwatch tell me 40 minutes. Yeah, it's plus. Yeah, I have adjusted my divine attributes of God. I refer here to the chapter in Dr. Morey's book, in which he claims or try to make a contrast in 10 points at least between the God of the Bible, so-called, and the God of Islam. And I'm sorry to say, as a professor, that he gets 1 mark in one of them only. And I believe 1 out of 10 is not enough really to pass. So let me go through his assertions and rebut them. Number 1, Dr. Morey says that, by way of comparison, under the title, knowable versus unknowable, implying that the God of the Bible is knowable, in Islam He's not knowable, something like an abstract supreme being. Here, we find the full knowledge, first of all, of God's essence is impossible. And I think Jew, Christian, or Muslim alike would admit that. The real essence of God is above us. The Quran says there is nothing like him or comparable unto him. But does that mean that he is unknowable? No. God is knowable also through his attributes and the manifestations of his mercy, love, and wisdom. The notion of an abstract or distant God is totally alien to one who really understands Islam. In fact, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a man came to him, simple Bedouin Arab. He said, is God, very innocent question, is God too close to have private, intimate prayer to him, or far away so that we have to shout on him? The answer came, and you find it in the Quran, was revealed to the Prophet. God speaks and says, when my servants ask you, O Muhammad, concerning me, then certainly I am near to them. I respond to anyone who calls on me. Let them, with a will, respond to my call and accept my guidance that they may be led aright. Secondly, Dr. Morey claims that God in Christianity or the God of the Bible is personal, in Islam is not. But again, here is something that a little bit of scholarship would resolve that apparent difficulty. There's no difficulty. First of all, in the Indo-European languages, the term personal or person actually means, in the theological sense, absolute perfections. And I give you the reference to that. I have a reference for it. Which is precisely what the Quran really teaches, as one Western writer indicated, Encyclopedia of Islam. But in the Arabic language, the equivalent of person is known as shakhs. In the Arabic language, the term has not undergone the transformation which it did in Indo-European languages. So when you ask a Muslim, he says, is Allah shakhs? He would say no, because shakhs in Arabic has only one meaning, a person, a human being, physical, limited being. Okay? Let's explain why. So in a sense, if we look beyond the superficial words, we find that the essence of God being personal and having relationship with mankind is quite clearly established in the Quran, and I give you some references to check on your own. Number 3, Dr. Morey said that spiritual versus non-spiritual, by way of contrast, the God of the Bible and the Quran. First of all, I must say it is wrong to say that God is a spirit. Angels are spirits, devils are spirits. This is a very limiting definition. I remember one Jewish rabbi saying that to try to define God in one particular word is to limit him, to limit the limitless. But it is equally wrong to say that God is non-spiritual, as the Quran speaks in relational terms and use that word spirit in relation to God. It says God created the human and breathed into him or her something of his spirit. How could we say that God is non-spiritual? Fourthly, Dr. Morey claims that in Islam, God is not even limited by his divine nature. Where did you get that from, Dr. Morey? If you mean by God is not limited, then you and I believe that God is omnipotent, if that's what we mean. But if it means self-limits to exclude traits and attributes that are not consistent with his divine glory, then you and I, not only you, believe in this. In the Quran, you read such statement like, كَتَبَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. Allah ordained on himself mercy. Not anybody imposed on him. You know, it's just like somebody says, can God create a stone that he cannot carry? The question itself is wrong. Because God himself, not me, eliminated from his divine attributes things that are not befitting for him. Where is the difference? Number 5, Dr. Morey contrasts also the God of the Bible as trustworthy, but not so in the case of Islam. Again, I say, this is wrong. This is absolutely incorrect, and the Quran profusely speaks about God never breaking his promise. 6, love of God. Yes, the Quran also speaks about the love of God. It calls him wadud, that's full of loving kindness. It speaks about his mercy and forgiveness, the manifestation of his love in creation, guidance, and care for us, but also indicate that love is reciprocal. If we love God, we have to follow his path. 7, Is God passive in history? Absolutely not. He is the sustainer. You open the Quran, the sustainer and nourisher of the universe. But we cannot say that the action of any human being are necessarily the actions of Allah. Allah is the sustainer. He is involved. Number 8. Dr. Morey says that the attributes, the so-called 99 names of Allah, are negative in nature. I have something for you, Dr. Morey, you might wish to look at. It's a real nice, I got it from Australia. Here is a little wheel. And if you put the names of Allah, can you tell me which of these 99 names that Dr. Morey claims to be all negative, which one is negative? I leave it to you. Number 9. Dr. Morey make the same mistake that many writers and speakers make about Islam, saying that salvation in Islam is by deeds, but in the case of Christianity or the Bible, in Christianity in particular, by grace. Who told you that? Dr. Morey, you claim you have read the 5,000 pages of Bukhari. Have you ever run through a hadith in which the Prophet says, none of you will enter paradise because of your deeds, righteous deeds? And he said, even me, had it not been for the grace and mercy of Allah. Now to come to the final conclusion. According to my watch, it's 48:22, but I respect I run my stopwatch, but I'm not going to argue about that. Okay. And thank you very much.
I want to bring you greetings from the one true triune God of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I do feel that I owe you an apology. I have been involved in many academic and professional dialogues. The first speaker is to give a positive proof or presentation of his position. Then the next speaker is to give his answer. Then it reverses, and the second speaker then gives his presentation, and then there's usually a 10-minute response. Dr. Badawi has chosen to make his first presentation a 50-minute response when he's never heard my lecture. I have never dialogued with him before, and as we shall see during my allotted time, he has committed, if you look on the paper, the typical logical fallacies, he has committed every one of those, particularly the last one, building straw man arguments. I have never said, I have never written that Muslims knowingly worship the moon god, or that the Koran teaches that we should worship the moon god. Given his 50-minute presentation, realize, number one, did he prove the existence of Allah? No. Did he demonstrate that the Allah of the Quran, not the Arabic Bible or some other Allah, Farrakhan or whoever it is, did he demonstrate that the Allah of the Quran was God? No. He assumed all of that, and whereas he had been allowed a 10-minute response to my presentation, he just did a 50-minute response, and unless you are the Mahdi and a great telepathist and of great mental powers, I do not see how you knew ahead of time what I'm going to present, because as you will see, ladies and gentlemen, what he has said in the majority of his statements have nothing to do whatsoever with my presentation. The second point that I do want to bring out is just to alleviate some of the concern. You will notice the little paper that was in ad hominem. Now you must understand that ad hominem means when you cannot answer the person, you attack his character. And in that little paper, he misquotes, he does this and he does that, just so that some of you don't spend your time on irrelevant issues, because remember, I could be the most wicked person that ever lived and still tell you the truth. So attacking me personally, which was done for 50 minutes, even though that was not the topic Allah, that was not the topic the Quran. He talked about Bob Morey and his book, Islamic Invasion. I feel a great compliment that you spent nearly 50 minutes on that. The one passage that came up in Toronto, there was a Muslim I was dialoguing with, and he spent a large amount of time on the color of Muhammad's penis. It was of some concern to him. And I said that in my copy of Bukhari, I was told that then his thigh was uncovered, the shift of his waist sheet, and I saw the whiteness of the thing. Now, does everyone see the word T-H-I-N-G? Does anyone see thigh? Does everyone who says this sees the word thing? Would you please raise your hand? Now, this gentleman went on and on and on that it did not say thing, it said thigh. Now, I did not haul the 9 volumes. This time I did, because these little tricks are red herrings to keep you from noticing that the topic, he was supposed to defend Allah, not defeat Morey. His purpose of coming down here was to stand up for the Quran and to prove to unbelievers it is the Word of God. Instead, he's attempted to say Bob Morey this, Bob Morey that, and I must apologize that I had hoped for better. Gleason Archer and the others had told me that they really did not think that Dr. Badawi would stoop to being rude, making these personal comments. With these few brief introductory remarks, we will begin with simply the issue that if someone walked up on the street and said, "Eat this," and you looked at this, you say, "Well, what is it? Where did it come from? Who baked it? What is? I got to find more about it." If someone went up to you and said, "Drink this," and they handed you a glass and say, "Drink it," would you drink it? No, you would have questions. And of course, when you buy a car and a salesman comes up and says, "Listen, buy this car," how many of you would buy the car without asking any questions? Is anybody foolish enough here? Maybe there's some car salesmen here who would like to meet you after the dialogue. Well, the issue is simply this: the art of asking questions is the very soul and substance of all scholarship and research. Asking questions and probing into things is the way you discover truth. Something is not true because you believe it. You should believe something if it is true. In order to find out whether or not, and I was given the title, "Is the Allah of the Quran the true universal God?" I see it was changed and no one asked my approval. Is Allah according to the Quran? I realize the changing of the wording means a lot, because then it becomes a no-brainer. There is no debate on the first point. Is Allah according to the Quran the true universal God? Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Is Joseph Smith, according to the Mormon writings, the prophet of God? Yes. Is Krishna of the Hindus, according to the Hindu scriptures, deity? Yes. So that's a no-brainer. There's no debate on this. Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, agnostics, we all agree. The Quran puts forth a God and says this is the true universal God. But so does the Bible, so does the divine principle, so does all the other religious books. But the question that I initially prepared for is the Allah of the Quran, the true universal God. And in order to answer that question, we have to probe into the issue of the sources, the origins from which this Allah comes, not only from the Quran, but also the Quran itself. Now, I recognize that when you begin to ask questions, some people get a little nervous because the Quran in Surah 5 warns us that if you ask questions, you may lose your faith, and that some people, by probing into the origins and sources, found out things they didn't want to know. Here we read in Surah 5, verses 101, 102, "O ye who believe, ask not questions about things which, if made plain to you, may cause you trouble." Now, given the fact that we analyze all literature, regardless if it's the Koran or the Bible, in terms of syntax and grammar and context, it is clear that this first part says, if you investigate and ask questions, and we have to make plain to you certain answers, those answers will be troubling. Would you notice the questions are not the things which would trouble the believers, it's the answers, what was made plain. Now he goes on to put an exemption. He says, but if you're asking about things when the Quran is being revealed, they will be made plain to you. If you just want to ask, what does this mean in the Quran, fine. But if you're stepping back and you're questioning the Quran itself, you're questioning Allah and Muhammad and all of these things, that's a horse of a different color. That's why verse 102, he goes on to say, some people before you did ask such questions, and on that account lost their faith. There are people here today who were born in a Muslim home, raised in the religion of Islam, who began to ask questions, and when the answers were made plain to them, they lost their faith in Islam. This is why Mandudi, in his commentary, tries at the first part to shift the focus. I know the Muslim answer to that passage will say, well, he's only talking about questions that are useless and unnecessary. But you see, any question that is upon the heart of a listener is necessary. You should never say to your child, that's a stupid question. When I do a radio talk show, and I've had one coast to coast, some people would call and say, well, Dr. Bob, I think I have a stupid question. And I always say, no questions are stupid. You can get a stupid answer, but you should never put down asking questions. Well, here, at the end of his commentary, he goes on actually to say, do not try to probe into such things. And he gives a warning to Muslims, almost as if he's saying, don't ask and don't tell. Now, Bukhari tells us that Muhammad would often respond in anger when people asked him questions. Volume 1, number 92, the Prophet was asked about things which he did not like. And when the questioner insisted, the Prophet got angry. His cheeks would get red. And then he made a very fascinating statement. He said, Allah has hated you for asking too many questions. See, that'd be the first problem I have. Maybe because I was raised in the home of a skeptic. Maybe because of being a New Yorker or Westerner or whatever it is. But when anyone tells me, Allah hates you for asking too many questions, what kind of God is that? If there is a God, he would be a God of truth. Truth is never afraid of investigation. If you're really secure in your religion, you're not going to be afraid of questions. This is why I have to say right off the bat that when the Quran, you have Maududi, you have Bukhari, they begin to say that it's not good to probe into things. I realize that for some of you, this will be a difficult exercise because the very titles are questions. Is the Allah of the Quran the true universal God? That's a question. Is the Quran the Word of God? That's a question. We are questioning Islam. The focus of this dialogue, and the reason I drove all the way down here, was to discuss the credibility of the religion of Islam. That's why, even though there is the attempt to shift the topic, so I will speak to the credibility of Bob Morey, and you see, that'll take your mind off Allah. If you could be thinking about Bob Morey instead of Allah, well then see, he can just slip Allah in while you're not looking. But we're going to ask questions, and I think it's important to do this. And as we pick up the Quran and we turn to Surah 25, we find that the people who lived in Muhammad's day questioned whether he was truly a prophet. They questioned whether or not the Quran was inspired, and they gave this accusation. The unbelievers say, this, referring to the Quran in the context, is nothing but a lie, which he has forged, and others have helped him do it. They're nothing but tales. One translation has myths of the ancients, which he has caused to be written, and they are dictated before him morning and evening. Now, the accusation of the people at that time was, number one, this is a pack of lies. Number two, it has multiple authors. Not only Muhammad was involved, but he had there's multiple authors. It's a book of fables and myths. Matter of fact, there's nothing new. The source of the Koran is not heaven, but earth. This was the accusation. Now, this means that the sources of the material found in the Koran, which would include the God Allah, was the main point of their accusation. How did the authors of the Koran answer this objection? Well, the passage goes on and says, in truth, it is they who have put forward an iniquity and a falsehood. The next verse, verse 6, say, the Koran was sent down by him who knows the mystery that is in the heavens. Now, I'm using Yusuf Ali's translation, and if you look, you will see that he has some footnotes. And in his footnotes, number 3058, he says, in their misguided arrogance, they say, we have heard such things before. Doesn't matter, we're talking about gods and stories and myths. They are pretty tales which have come down from ancient times. They are good for amusement, but who takes them seriously? End quote. Now, the answer, according to Yusuf Ali, is that the Quran teaches spiritual knowledge of what is ordinarily hidden from men's sight, and such knowledge can only come from God, to whom alone is known the mystery of the whole creation. You say, well, that's sort of a limp answer. Here, these people are saying the Quran is a rehash of previously existing materials. There's nothing new. There's no revelation going on here. We know all of this stuff from our pagan ancestors. Well, again, as we go to Maududi, his commentary, and if you read this, if you very carefully read this statement, apparently this is a weighty argument. Here's one of the great commentaries on the Quran. For there can be no greater proof of the fraud of prophethood than to specify its source. Do you see what Maududi is saying?